And then moving on to the edges, this is one thing where having Von Miller back is going to be a astronomical boost because everybody talks about how Bradley Chubb was great last year. And don't get me wrong, he was very solid. He piled up 57 total pressures last year, 8 sacks, but 21 total pressures and 4 sacks came in 2 games. In week 4 against the New York Jets and week 11 or 12 against the Miami Dolphins, whichever week that was. That's where he got half his sacks and almost half of his pressures. That's very concerning for the guy because you want him to kind of become more of a Batman, especially if you're looking at moving on from Von Miller. You want him to be this top pass rusher. And yeah, he dealt with a lot of double teams because Malik Reed, because Derek Tuska, because Jeremiah Tauchu, all these guys that were sitting there coming in as being pass rushers off the edge, they just weren't able to do anything. And so Bradley Chubb got all the attention. He got a little bit more double teams, and he was pretty effective with breaking through them. I mean, he had a really high double team rate, but if you want to be an elite pass rusher, you got to do it a lot more consistently. And that's something that Von Miller, everybody talks about how he breaks through double teams, and he does so efficiently and effectively, and he still gets big numbers despite the double teams. Bradley Chubb, a little bit different. And my biggest concern with Bradley Chubb last year isn't necessarily just the fact that he had almost half his pressures and half of his sacks in 2 games. It's the fact that those pressures didn't come down in the New York Jets game specifically until the second and third offensive tackle, left tackle, were put into the game. He was pretty much shut down when Mekhi Becton was out there before he left and then came back and then left again. I mean, Bradley Chubb was just largely ineffective. Then in the Miami game they were starting rookies at their offensive tackles. One of them on the right tackle is a guy who's actually going to be moved into guard. And so it's just their left tackle now maybe moving to right tackle. So it's just players out of position. And they were rookies. And he was able to capitalize on that. When he faced tougher competition at tackle, Bradley Chubb was left basically with nothing on the board. He only had 3 total games, I believe, with more than 5 pressures. And that's not something you want to see from a guy who can be a top pass rusher. Granted, part of the issue was that he was coming back from his injury, and so that kind of had him see a slow start. But week 4, when you saw him pick up those 11 pressures and 3 total sacks, like that's the hope that he's finally able to turn it around. But he just kind of faded away until week 11 or 12 against the Miami Dolphins, came back in a big way, and then just kind of faded off again. And his run defense was not as good as it was his rookie year. I mean, it kind of took a step back. And it just kind of seemed when watching his run defense that he wanted to be the type of run defender that he actually isn't. So getting Von Miller back is going to be a big help to Bradley Chubb. It's going to take some attention away. It's going to give the Broncos another pass rusher up front that can be a lot more consistent than Malik Reed was last year. And, of course, it's Von Miller. Von Miller is a very stout run defender. He's very consistent with getting pressures. He's a guy that's just hard to handle. And basically the easiest way to handle Von Miller is you're getting the ball out under 2 seconds because he can just get pressures that quickly. So hopefully he's back. Hopefully he stays healthy. Hopefully he stays out there. Hopefully he has a big year because his impact is probably going to be the biggest impact for this defense, either in a positive or negative way, depending on what happens with him. Then Malik Reed, he was solid last year. I mean, there's no other ways to put it around. I know he put up some big numbers, but when it came to sack or pass rush win rate, he was one of the lowest. And in terms of total of, I'm trying to think what the actual stat is, but it's something like actual stats. I can't remember the actual name of it. Is he had a very low rate for it. I mean, it's sacks that you're winning by yourself. They're not coverage sacks. They're sacks that you're winning quickly. You're beating the offensive lineman, and you're quality of sacks. That's what it is, quality of sacks. And Malik Reed was very low there. I mean, he had a decent number of them. They just weren't high quality. I mean, there were coverage sacks. There were sacks where another pass rusher was forcing the quarterback into his direction, things like that. It was a very low quality number of sacks, which, hey, sacks are sacks. Sacks are important. Sacks help the defense. Sacks are a positive play for the defense. Always and always will be that case. But you want better quality for a guy who's going to be starting. And, I mean, granted, he was kind of thrust into a starting role unexpectedly with Von Miller getting hurt. But you still want better quality from them. And I mean, Malik Reed, he's a solid player. He's a solid depth piece. But he's a guy that he's a unrestricted free agent after the season. And it just kind of hits that point of how much are you willing to pay for him? You want to see what he does this year as that number 3 pass rusher, which you kind of envision for him anyways. And then you got to decide how much are you going to pay for him? How long are you going to be willing to pay him that for? And he's a situation where I could see another team, just because he put up some big numbers, maybe not the highest quality, a team being willing to throw $10 million at him or more. I mean, we saw a guy like Leonard Floyd just get, $16 million? Like these pass rushers that just aren't aren't the highest quality of pass rushers, but they have large numbers. They're getting money thrown at them, and Malik Reed could follow suit with that. And Denver, quite frankly, I don't see them following that pathway. I think he could be one where they decide to let him go. But they also added a lot to their edge group. I mean, they brought in Jonathan Cooper. Derek Tuska should be back. Andre Mintz, who's an undrafted free agent, who I like quite a bit for them. He can be a big piece for them. So they have this talent there as they're at their edge rushers behind them. And that's going to be the big thing, is because despite having Von Miller back and Bradley Chubb back, they both have been dealing with a lot of injuries in their history. Von Miller's working his way back. You got to have some decency there behind them to help give them breaks. And this is where Malik Reed really steps in. This is where hopefully Jonathan Cooper or Derek Tuska are able to separate themselves and really step up and be this key piece here.